discussing a presentation by Richard Sutton. He's a professor of computer science at the University of Alberta, and he gave a presentation about plasticity of learning. I think it's one of those presentations which is based on a paper. Links are in the show notes. That I believe it's one of those papers that will change the course of AI. The topic is plasticity of algorithms. Plasticity is the ability to continuously learn. The definition is, think about it this way, like you learned a certain thing and you keep learning new things without forgetting the old things. There's a concept in AI called catastrophic forgetting, which is slightly different. Catastrophic forgetting is the problem of when you keep learning, let's say, how to do X, and then you learn how to do Y, and while you learn how to do Y, you forgot how to do X, which in technical terms means the weights that were trained for X get overwritten by what's important for Y, and then you can't perform X anymore. So that's catastrophic forgetting. What Sutton is talking about here is plasticity of learning, which is a little bit more subtle and I think actually amazing. And here's why. I want to set the stage and then discuss the paper and presentation and give an outlook. The reason this is so important is because particularly in robotics, people are continuously facing the problem of how to evaluate models against each other. In particular, Tesla has that problem with FSD. And I think the problem is kind of the wrong question to ask because right now, the way deep learning methods work is they're sort of train and then deploy type of models. And there's no continuous learning in the model. So each model gets trained, you put it in a cluster, thousands and thousands of GPUs, and then you train, and then you hope it's better than the model before. If you could flip this on the head and say, look, I don't care whether my model now is better than the one 6 months ago. I know the algorithm implicitly is going to improve if I just keep doing what I'm doing. So in other words, I can maybe not cover all possible edge cases. I'm particularly talking now about robotics, but you could apply this to large language models or any kind of other algorithm. If I keep adding new knowledge in the training set, then I should also learn this new knowledge, and my model should get better by definition. So I don't have to worry that much about which model is better. I know this model that I just trained is going to get better the more I train it. So I hope this subtlety comes across. In my opinion, this is really important because I think the AI community is kind of, the equivalent would be, think about it this way. Imagine you are a college student, you're 18 years old, you just graduated high school, and now you're thinking, should I study physics or should I study math? And once I'm done after 4 years, that's it. I'm going to apply what I've learned to the world. By the way, that's how a lot of people think, and I think that's wrong. Because what you really are going to do if you want to be successful is you're going to continuously learn. So it does matter what your initial, let's say, call it the pre-training or the first sort of initial training, right? It does matter whether you study physics or math, particularly it matters whether you study physics or gender studies or some stupid thing like that. I think that matters a lot, but maybe math and physics doesn't matter that much, but it still matters, right? But it's only a beginning, and then you keep adding because you have plasticity. We humans have plasticity, and what Richard Sutton's doing in this paper, which was published in Nature, and also in this presentation that he gave, is discuss this problem and offer solution. And the solution is twofold. One is keep the weight small, and second, induce variability. This is not even on podcast. It's November 20th, 2024. This is Krimdelko. For the day, the fund is down 2%. The market's down 20 basis points. For the year, we are up 66%. The market's up 23.7%. We're up from by 42.3%. So this is one of those papers that is going to change the course of AI. Richard Sutton is I would call him an eminence grise of AI. I don't know why he lives in Canada. It looks like there must have been some political thing because he's American, and then he moved to Canada and he gave up his citizenship. Whatever, I don't know the details. He's the one with a famous essay about what was it? Something like the uncomfortable lesson or something. The bitter lesson, I think that's it. The bitter lesson. Basically, don't teach AI how we think because we don't know how we think. Develop models, generalize, and train and train and train. That was his message. It got validated by OpenAI. Kudos to OpenAI, and it's being deployed now by everybody else. Now, what Richard is working on now is saying, look, it's fine. We need to generalize. We need to add training and training, but we need to change the way we approach training because we shouldn't be training a model and then once it's trained, that's it. And then hopefully that model's better than the model before. We should find a way to continuously improve. So the more data we throw at the model, the better it gets. He calls that plasticity in learning. That means that as you train, you keep getting better and better at new tasks, and you also maintain the ability to be good at whatever you've trained before. Now, as a tangent, I want to throw in the RTX project by Sergey Levin, Berkeley, and a bunch of other people, Berkeley, Stanford, and so forth, that have collected a bunch of data sets from robotics and trained all of those different task-specific data sets in one big model and then realized that there's a lot of transfer learning. So I think this is kind of related because in both cases we have certain plasticity that we get better at doing one thing while we're training for other things too. So it's kind of related. Tangent close back to Richard Sutton. So the key takeaway from the paper is that what happens in traditional deep learning methods is that certain weights start getting overwhelmingly influential for the model. And that's what we actually call learning. When those weights start becoming influential, and that's what the model is. It's going to be good at whatever those weights determine needs to be done. And in many cases, that's really good for an initial start. For example, when ImageNet, when AlexNet won the ImageNet competition, it became very good at classifying pictures. The problem is, if we, let's say, took the 50 million ImageNet pictures that AlexNet was trained on, and now we added another 100 million pictures, we would realize, this is according to the paper, that the model actually wouldn't get better. So at some point, we have a decline in performance, even though we keep adding training data. And that's what Richard is after. And this is very consistent with the bitter lesson, because he wants to be able to keep learning. He wants to be able to keep at it. But what's the point if we keep learning if we don't get better? So how can we build algorithms that get better the more data we put at them? And by the way, in principle, get better. So it's not like we just hope they get better. We know they're going to get better. And the solution is that we want to keep those weights small. Now, there's some technical ways to do that, L2 regularization, and then shrink and perturb. Those are the ideas. Fundamentally, the idea here is really very simple. Keep the weights small. So when certain weights start getting larger in relation to other weights, put them down. And then perturb just means reinitialize certain weights. Now, which weights do you want to reinitialize? This is a tricky question, because you don't want to reinitialize weights that are important for what you've been training so far. So what Sutton is doing is he's saying, I'm going to keep weights from becoming overly dominant, but I'm also going to replace very insignificant weights. I'm going to reinitialize them, and then hopefully by reinitializing them, when I keep adding new data, they can become more influential. So this is really the sort of the fundamental idea of the paper. I don't want to go too much into details. The links are in the show notes. I just want to say two things. One is applied to AI, and then actually another thing about society, which, as usual, when we really go deep into AI, we learn a lot about society. So, but let's start with the AI part of the conclusion. So, one of the big problems in robotics, particularly for FSD, according to Tesla, is that how do we know model, 1.0 is better than model 0.5? In other words, how do we know that the next model is better than the model we have right now? How do we even know that? And that's a big problem. It's an evaluation problem. It's eval is a big deal. There's lots of PhDs written about this. Can we predict that a model is going to get better if we train it in a certain way? Another big problem. Sutton is offering a very elegant solution here because he's circumventing all these questions by saying, I don't care whether model X is going to be better than model Y. Implicitly, I know if I structure my algorithm in model X in a certain way, it's going to get better by definition, and that's what he calls, shrink and perturb, autoregularization, or continual backprop, which is another way to say I reinitialize certain weights. So I induce variability, right? So what you want to do is you want to keep certain weights from becoming dominant, and you want to keep inducing variability. That's the fundamental idea. This is ongoing work. Sutton says there's still lots of work to be done, but I think this is a very interesting direction, and I would highly recommend the AI team at Tesla to look at this paper and see how it can be applied to FSD and Optimus. Now, I want to say a few things about society, which I find interesting here. And if you think about society, well, a human being is very similar, right? What you keep learning, and what happens with us as the older we get, the more stubborn we get, and the less we can change. You can't teach an old dog new rules, right? Why is that? Because exactly what happens, we lose our plasticity. We have a phenomenal plasticity when we're teenagers, college years, 30s, and then it starts declining. And why? It's the same thing. Like, think about it this way. If our brain's a neural net with certain weights, those weights start overwhelming. Like, whatever that may be. For certain people, it might be, I see the world through the lens of math. Everything is logic, and I just refuse to accept anything else. Other people see the world through, I don't know, everything's a power game, like, let's say, the woke crowd. Other people are, see the world through the Bible, and it becomes very political very quickly, right? And that's the reason why I think the world becomes political and the world is polarized, and why we have all these wars is because with age, people become pretty stubborn because we lose the plasticity. And I think what Sutton is offering here as a solution for deep learning could be also offered for a society. How about we keep the weights small? In other words, we don't want to have too much of any kind of knowledge prevalent in our society. We want to keep it flexible, and we want to reinitialize. In other words, we want to induce variability. We want to try new things. Now, I think partly that's what America has by having this culture of innovation, particularly in Silicon Valley, and hopefully we can maintain that. So the more new things we try, the more the more variability we induce. And on both sides of the aisle, we want to not have too much dominant narratives or dominant ideas prevailing. So we want to keep it flexible. We want to, we want to stay within a framework that is acceptable. I think that's the U.S. Constitution and maybe also the Western tradition of the Judeo-Christian value system. Those things, I think, are important as sort of a framework in which we move around. So we have, liberty of thought and liberty of body as a fundamental right that needs to be protected. We have the pursuit of happiness, the refusal of somebody taking ownership of your property, whether it's your body or your financial assets, without due process. Those kinds of things I think are worth keeping them. If you use the deep learning analogy, you want to keep those weights fixed. We don't want to change those. But within that framework, we want to keep it. We want to keep variability. We want to try new things. And I think in that realm, so far, yeah, we're actually not so bad. If you think about it, we had periods of extreme, maybe right-wing anti-communist McCarthyism. Then we had woke, which is the extreme left-wing anti-Western civilization movement. Now we're going back to Trumpism, which hopefully will be a more libertarian view of the world and open up new, spirits and animal spirits and growth prospects. So we have this variability actually in our system, and we also have immigration, which brings variability. But we obviously again want to keep it in a framework that still maintains the fundamental rules, for example, of property rights, and avoids tragedy of the commons and things along those lines. We have a large deficit we cannot accept. I think that's the kind of variability that, in my opinion, doesn't work well. So back to Sutton and conclusion of the paper. I think again this is an important paper. I'm definitely going to start it in my review, and I recommend, particularly in the robotics community, I think this idea of keeping weights, not of avoiding overwhelming weights and inducing variability, is keeping plasticity of learning, which is very important. Thank you.